Welcome to AI FISEC Today, the physical security industry's first podcast dedicated to uncovering the mysteries and the opportunities around AI. I'm your host, Don Marone, and I'm really excited for this episode's guest, where we talk about agent ethics. Meet Steve Lindsey, founding partner and chief information and technology officer at LiveView Technologies, where he was instrumental in designing, forming, and implementing the company's AI-powered video and IoT management system. As a prolific inventor, Steve co-invented the mobile security unit, a reliable off-grid solar-powered camera, and IoT data acquisition system. He also developed a cost-effective live video streaming solution over cellular networks, the autonomous IoT orchestration platform, and media network. Steve joined LVT in 2011 after leading technology, software, engineering, and development teams at multiple companies, including i3 Technologies and Novell, and he holds a bachelor's degree in electronic and information technology from Brigham Young University. Now, let's jump into the conversation with Steve to learn more about agent ethics. All right, welcome to the podcast, Steve.
Hey, thanks for having me here, and let's get into this.
Let's get into it. So we're here to talk about agent ethics. And for me, as someone that owns an AI automation agency, I'm super excited to talk about this. I know you've got a great technical background and practical background around the topic that our listeners are going to really appreciate. And me, as the podcast host, will greatly appreciate because it's very in line with my world, my day to day. And so, but before we jump in, I would love for you to just give the audience your background from your words, and then we'll roll right into the topic.
Okay, yeah. So Steve Lindsey, I'm one of the co-founders and currently the chief technology officer of LiveView Technologies. We also go by the name LVT. You probably see our units around in parking lots, solar panel trailer looking thing with blue flashing lights. So that's our company providing agentic AI capability or technologies for physical security. So my background, really, I'm just a nerd, a geek at heart. I grew up in a house where my dad was also a geek and a nerd. And so I always had technology around me. I was always fascinated by it. I got a degree in electronic engineering, emphasis in computer software development, and immediately went into working for a company called Novell. So I don't know if our audience knows much about Novell, but we were we owned like 98% of the network operating system for companies back in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. And so worked a lot with enterprise computing, everywhere from collaboration software to the network operating system, and eventually got into identity and access management there. At that same time, I decided to start a business doing audio networking, of all things. This was back when homes had intercoms in them, and we were starting to make the transition into like digital media. This is back in the 2000s. So I thought it would be really awesome to have a product that could network audio in the home and kind of modernize that. And that was my first foray in entrepreneurship. And then I got involved with another company doing artificial speech synthesis. And this is kind of the technology that's underneath the foundational technology that's used in some of the deep fakes nowadays. So I don't know if I should be proud or ashamed of some of that work back in the day. But the digital signal processing part of that was extremely fascinating to me and really launched me into the next chapter, which became LVT, where I was able to apply, again, a lot of the edge computing capability, the cloud computing capability, a lot of the network infrastructure knowledge that I knew, digital signal processing, which then led into a lot of the AI capabilities. So yeah, just all of that background was, it fit really well for just a band of 4 guys that were starting a business 20 years ago. Which became LVT today. So yeah, it's been quite the ride, a lot of various experiences, but I would say that right now, it's still mind blowing for me to see what AI, especially agentic AI, can do. Right, this used to be science fiction, and it's just incredible. After all the things that we've seen with the internet coming and mobility with cell phones, and now we've got this the ability for these computers to really think and reason. It's exciting. So applying these to physical security is actually just another exciting chapter in my career. And so, yeah, this is a fun topic to discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to cover, I think, a lot of bases in this discussion around agent ethics, right? But we'll start off with a foundational piece for our listeners that might not even know what an agent is, right? So Steve, for those listeners that are new to that term, how would you define agentic AI and how does it differ from traditional AI and security systems?
Yeah. So I always I always like to phrase agentic AI for the general audience. Think about your organizational chart in your company. You've got specialists that you hire to do certain things, and they literally are, resources within your company. You can think of agentic AI the same way, except it's a computer that does it. It's a specialized agent that's able to reason through information, able to make decisions, and able to take action on that based on training that it's received. And it just so happens that the training that it's received is built around technologies around like LLMs, large language models and things like that. So when you can apply that, it's able to start working through problems in a way in a lot more dynamic and agile way. And that's what really makes it different than just static programming. You'll hear terms like deterministic and non-deterministic, right? And I think we'll talk about some of that in the ethics, especially when we talk about adoption. But what really makes agentic AI powerful beyond anything we've had to date is it's able to handle a whole wide range of information that it can reason through like a human would and come to a conclusion, which is different than statically programming every possible outcome that you think could come out of this based on any kind of data that comes in, right? And so that's what makes it really powerful and more like human-like than we've ever seen before is this ability to react to that. So again, simply put, I always frame agentic AI as basically this specialized agent that is able to do a job based on reasoning, decision making, and taking action as if it was an employee working for a business.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, you know, there's that definition, and then there's the one that the engineers know that lose like 99% of people, right? Where they start talking about like forward and backward propagation and neural
Yeah.
nets, and I do wonder, side quest here, like, do you think that the test against the GPU with deep learning was just like random, or did they actually plan that? Because I thought once they tested it, that they just saw the generative AI just produce, but I wonder if they actually were planning that on the NVIDIA side or someone else, like at Google Labs, or it was a total experiment. And they were surprised by generative AI, or the aliens brought it down. I don't know. Could be either one.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that because, when you look at the history of NVIDIA, I think it was, again, more hobbyists that figured this
Hmm.
out
Yeah.
and brought it to the attention. It makes perfect sense when you think about the parallelism needed, right, to run
Hmm.
neural nets. But yeah, I mean, a bunch of these academic scientist hobbyists who have been doing AI for years
Hmm.
realized that, hey, I can do some of this with a GPU. And you're right. I mean, it's fascinating when you look at the valuation of NVIDIA just in the last 5 years. It's just mind boggling. I remember seeing them at CES 6 years ago going, oh, that's right. That's the graphics company. What new graphic card do they have for games? And now we don't even talk about graphic card for games, really. I mean,
Hmm.
it's all about what more AI data centers, everything else. And, not to go off topic here, but I think another fascinating thing about NVIDIA was not only did they build the hardware, but they built the software stack, right, to make this possible. And that's what kind of leaped them ahead. When you look at other providers like Intel and AMD and even Broadcom, yeah, they were building the hardware, but they didn't have the software stack. And so these hobbyists that were trying to use this for AI, it kind of all came together in a perfect
Hmm.
storm for them to actually to utilize it. And now the rest of us are like catching on. So there's always a few smart people out there that, figure it out. And then all of us people hop on the bandwagon.
Yeah, yeah. Getting back to the definition or of agents, I've also seen, like, to your point, so these things really operate great in the gray, but a part of gray is not just context, but it's also the data. So they're really good at handling unstructured data, and 80% of data is unstructured.
Yep.
And what better example of unstructured data can we give than surveillance video, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Like the ultimate unstructured of unused data.
Correct.
But yeah, so I want to take that as a lead into something you wrote from Security Journal Americas back in June of this year. And then you described agentic AI as this transformative technology in physical security. But from your opinion, what makes this approach so pivotal right now, and a comparison to, in the past?
Well, let's go back just even 10 years. Cameras were all motion detection.
Mm-hmm.
And who really used that for anything productive, right? The false positive amounts for any, especially like an alert response center, right? That's supposed to do proactive video monitoring. Nobody could use it. And it wasn't until the heuristic capabilities or even the object detection and classification capabilities came out where you could actually say, oh, well, if you can detect a human or a vehicle or an animal with some level of accuracy to keep my false positives low, I can actually build a monitoring business around this. And so that's kind of what launched a lot of these video monitoring businesses. The problem though is when we look like that works great in sterile environments. Nobody's supposed to be on my site, and as soon as it detects somebody, let me know, right? That model works fine. But that's only half the problem. The other problem is during the day, you've got all kinds of people who need to be on site. So how do you pull the red actors, the bad people, out of the sea of green actors who should be there? And that's where we have to take another leap in AI capability. And so that's that unstructured data that you're talking about is I have to be able to focus more on behaviors than I do just detecting a simple person or a vehicle, because that's just not enough. And I would even argue that behavior isn't enough. Like the example we like to use is, let's say that you are worried about people laying down. Maybe that's a security threat. Well, if you see someone laying down next to a tree, that's not a threat. That's just somebody relaxing, right? But if you see somebody laying down next to your car and then maybe they have a jigsaw in their hand, well, I do care about that. Right? And I think us humans think the same exact way. So what's transformative about this is, again, I love how you frame it. It's this unstructured data. You have no clue what
Mm-hmm.
the sensor is going to see, and you have to reason through that to understand the behavior and the context of that behavior to understand what is the threat, if there is one. And then if
Mm-hmm.
there is a threat, I need to actually start understanding how severe is this threat, because I don't think we'll ever get to a point, maybe even the near term, that all humans are out of the loop. I think there'll always be humans in the loop. But I think it's fair to say that right now technology has advanced enough to argue that there are low severity issues that technology can probably action on its own. And then of course the high severity ones, we need humans to be dealing with this. Well, in order for the humans to deal with it, they can't be bogged down with all the minutia and noise of these low severity issues, right? So that's kind of what we have focused on at LVT is, can we get automation to deal with the noise and allow the humans to focus, on the important things at the top? So that's where I believe is transformative, is the ability to pull red actors out of a sea of green actors in non-sterile environments in a very unstructured data format way, and not only do the detection but also automate an action against that for some of those lower risk situations.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I mean, and I've looked at it from the symptom to the problem that agents solve is repetitive and mundane tasks of any kind. And then you've got the application of how much, like if you think of the spectrum of how much we're automating with these agents, these digital workers, I think it lives somewhere on a matrices of repetitive, which makes it a candidate, but then impact from low to high. If it's low impact, then it could maybe be fully autonomous, where, like in this case, it removes lower severity alarms that are noise. And then high impact, it just maybe provides more information that the human didn't already have in order to make better decisions. And I love that because, even as a professional seller for my career in the industry, I've done a good share of cold calls. Even started an enterprise team in one of the companies I was at. And what was really interesting was I would go from the same day making cold call blocks into having these deep discovery conversations with an enterprise customer. And those are two different ends of the spectrum of my brain use. One would kill my brain cells, right? Because
Yeah.
it's just literally over and over, or whatever. And then the other one was flexing my brain cells. And I remember telling leadership at the time, I said, man, this is really tough to do both of these. And I can do both. But the issue though is this isn't preparing me for this. The more high intellect work or high impact work I'm doing, it's just like if I was going to the gym, right? If I don't go to the gym at all, I'm not preparing myself for the day at the gym. But if I'm always going to the gym, then maybe I get in better shape. I can lift more weight. I can run faster. I can bike faster because I'm always in this category of high impact. And I love that idea because I can see so much potential for operators security personnel to be able to level up naturally just by way of agents removing the noise.
Yeah, what's interesting about the whole AI movement, you hear the fear of, oh, this is going to create layoffs and everything else like that. But I think people are focused on the wrong thing or looking at it from the wrong perspective. You nailed it right on the head. It's like we are supposed to be knowledge workers, but we spend the majority of our time doing mundane things that aren't knowledge work, right? And so can the AI do the mundane thing so we can focus on the knowledge work? And I think from business, especially when you look at like owners of businesses, you're trying to get the most production out of your workforce as possible because that's right, your margins. That's how you stay profitable and that's how you grow. And so as you continue to invest in your workers and hiring them, you want them focused on the unique knowledge work capability that they have. And so you do want to embrace AI to take care of the mundane minutia things so that they have the time to work on the knowledge work, right? Now, what that means is you probably don't hire at the rate that you normally would. You might be hiring a little less aggressive with your growth, but that still doesn't mean that you're going to just lay people off, right? So I think what's really unique about the physical security industry with this concept, though, is think about it. Physical security is a necessary evil, and people only throw just enough money at it to deal with the liability issue, right? I mean, let's just be honest. So it's always an understaffed business anyway. So if there was an industry that could benefit from AI, it's the physical security industry, right? We have always been scrambling for more resources, and this just only can help and relieve that.
Yeah, spot on. So maybe let's take you're giving some, I think, really high level on the agent and what it's solving and, why this is such a transformative tech right now and it's pivotal. But maybe let's talk from the streets a little bit. Like, what real world problems are you seeing that it's actually solving for security operators?
Yeah, we actually have a graphic for this, so it's kind of hard for me to
Oh, sweet.
explain this.
Perfect.
And maybe I can include a graphic for you, but we actually break it down in what we call the jobs to be done. There's 7 jobs to be done, and I'll kind of explain them from left to right. And it actually works on kind of a preventative behavior, then the incident that happens, and then more of an investigative response or reactive behavior, right? So starting on the left, your job is to detect what is the issue, what's the threat, right? Then the next job is to assess. Okay, is this really a threat or not? And what severity is that threat? Then the next job is there an opportunity to deter it from happening, right? I like to use the analogy of a lifeguard. A lifeguard, for the most part, people don't notice that even the lifeguard's there. But if you run along the pool, right, the lifeguard will blow their whistle and let you know, don't run. And it's for your safety, but they'll kind of remind you, hey, that behavior, be careful. Or if you're drowning, they'll come get you, right, or something like that. But that's kind of how I think about the preventative nature of this and deterrence is it's trying to give you that last opportunity to change your decision-making process and not follow through with what you want to do. But let's say that you decide you want to do that. Now you do it. We have Bing, and now you go into a response mode, right? So if depending on the severity, maybe you're calling the police coming in. Maybe it's an active shooter situation, right? There's a real-time response thing happening. Or maybe it's low enough severity where, okay, I'm not going to actually do a response here. Now I just need to start gathering the evidence I need in case I want to prosecute. So that's the response. That's the 4th one. So now we move in the 5th, and this is now what we call reporting. This is where you're gathering the evidence, you're filling out reports, you're doing everything that you need to prepare all that information for the investigation, which is the 6th one. This is where you're trying to connect dots, right? Especially in, let's take retail crime. You got problems with organized crime. I guess not just in retail. You just got organized crime situations, right? So you're trying to connect the dots. You're trying to look at, a lot of these organized crimes are really good at only doing a crime that's just underneath the threshold of prosecutability. And so in order to prosecute them, you have to look at them and their chain of crimes over time and space, right? So now you've got to do all of that case building for that. Anyway, that's the investigation side, and then there's the prosecution side. So those are the 7 jobs to be done. And when we think about agentic AI, due to the unstructured data problem that you pointed out before, that's the detect. Like, can I detect all of these scenarios where red actors and amongst green actors exist? Then the next one is where that agentic really comes into play. It's what's the reasoning model? Can it reason? Can it assess? Can it decide what needs to be done about that? Maybe that goes to immediately response to humans because of the severity. Maybe it goes to an automated deterrence. And this is where we see opportunities also for generative AI. One of the things that we introduced here at LVT was this ability to dynamically create a talk-down message based on what it sees, which isn't the same old recording that it plays.
Right.
It's more real to what's happening. And again, what you're striving for in deterrence is believability, right? So we've been able to introduce some really interesting generative AI capabilities in that. Then once we hit, the response and moving into the reporting, there's a lot of great technologies out there that are able to use natural language searching. For example, we're seeing a lot of that coming out now from various providers, where instead of trying to click on search filters of certain attributes, you can literally just describe what it is that happened and it will find all of that. So again, very powerful tool to simplify the time it takes to find evidence. And then in case building, there's some great technologies out there using AI to start looking at all the evidence and looking for similar patterns and stuff that can say, hey, I think this case and this incident, and this incident are all related, right? And they can bring that to a human's attention so they can do their knowledge work on that, right? So all along those jobs to be done, there's great application of agentic AI or even generative AI or other kinds of these new enabling technologies.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's a lot of steps for an operator to go through. And I can imagine any listening would love the fact that a lot of the things that drag them down every day are removed and they can just focus on outcomes. And it actually is also another interesting thought for me. I thought about this for a while now, obviously having the podcast and then being in the space, is that manufacturers, software manufacturers alike, and like yours, will be competing against the best agentic AI or the best digital worker. Who's going to produce the best outcomes? And now the conversation will change from here's my subscription thing that you as a user have to click and learn and maybe fly to a different state to get certified, to you're going to hire our digital worker because it's going to produce the best results. We've seen it in live and action. And being also you being in the industry for a while and having your background, also having the practicality to understand those steps that happen in that investigation process so intimately, and one of the things too is, even as building agents on my side, is that having domain experience is absolutely critical with this stuff, because it's those steps that for you to get feedback from all of your customers for every single bit along the way is I've seen it very hard to build that in practice. And sometimes you have to make an assumption based on the domain. And it's kind of one of those things going back to like Henry Ford. If Henry Ford, took the advice of his customers, he would have built a faster horse, right? So that's where we're at now, is kind of like saying, hey, we've been doing this long enough where we've seen the bottlenecks and we have to build towards a lot of assumptions. Yes, while getting feedback from our customers, but building quickly so that way we can, not that this is the case that's doing here, but get it shipped and get it used and get feedback and get it out in the market. So that way we can start building towards this grandiose, agent that's going to solve those investigation steps. So I love that you're doing that, and I love that you're involved with that. So kudos to you.
Well, yeah, I mean that's one of the powerful things about the agentic AI is you're kind of hinting at this, but let's dive a little bit deeper on this. The weird thing about physical security is it's kind of like measure, countermeasure, right? And it's like you're playing this game against the bad guys. And the industry, like when you think about business technologies, they don't change that often and they don't need to change that often, right? So the investments you make in business technologies, you think in years, right? In security, you're almost thinking like days and weeks, because the bad guy, he's observing, he's trying to study your patterns, and you need to change those somehow to countermeasure what their countermeasure was to you. And so if there was ever an industry that needed the agility of an agentic AI infrastructure, it is the physical security industry. And so again, going back to some of the differences between what I call traditional computer vision methodologies and these new exciting vision language models, LLM models through an agentic process. When you think about computer vision, these things take tons and tons of data to train for one specific use case. And if that use case changes, it's all for naught, right? Whereas in a more dynamic agentic world, you have a lot more agility and you can change what you're looking for, why you're looking for it. And it can be more along the lines of how humans think and how they adapt than just this strict training models. I think that's the other thing that's really exciting for the physical security industry is the fact that we should have out of this should be technologies that are a lot more dynamic and agile to the ever changing landscape that we're dealing with.
How important do you think is, so this is a AI community term or industry terms like self-recursive learning, or basically the ability for these things to learn as they're used. How do you think that's going to be done with these kinds of things we're talking about? Like, will it require this positive and negative reinforcement from the user? So let's say it detects something, it's going to send it to the operator and say, here you go. And the operator is going to say, you're supposed to detect this, but it's not that. Is that how we get to self-recursive learning, or is there some other method to get there?
Yeah, the example you gave is what I typically use in computer vision examples of machine learning and that recursive learning. When we think about agentic, it's a little different because we're not putting the business logic and the learning into the video model itself. All the video model has to do is tell me what it sees, right? And so you're just basically doing a transformation of video to text. Once I have the text, now I'm feeding that in through a reasoning model. So the reasoning model now is what you're reinforcing, not within the computer vision model itself. So it kind of changes where that logic is put. But you're right. That's where the improvements are made there. One of the things, I know we want to talk about ethics in here, and we talk about, how do you steer that or navigate through that landscape of ethics within AI? But that's what's also exciting about this is when we think about where biases or stereotypes or those types of things get introduced into computer vision, those things aren't as prone in agentic. And the reason why is, again, when an agent's trying to reason through a behavior analysis, it doesn't care your skin color. It doesn't care what clothes you're wearing that might reveal some type of religious or theological belief or whatever. So those biases, or even gender, right? It doesn't care. What is trying to reason through is, does this look like a suspicious behavior that is not allowed here, as described by my human operator who told me to look for these types of behaviors. So now I'm not saying it's 100% immune, but what I'm saying is it's less influenced by that because of the nature of how the reasoning model would work. Well, yeah, I think there's, again, we have to change how we think about how the technology is put into practice by again, thinking video to transform text to reason, instead of just saying, hey, I'm going to try to train this model on as many video clips as possible. And who knows what it's picking up in those video clips, right? Where some of those biases get introduced. Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at the recursive learning aspects of it. Now, that doesn't mean that LLMs by nature don't take on a personality of their own. I don't know if you've ever noticed that as you're communicating with an LLM or a chatbot or something, it starts to take on a personality that matches what it's getting from you. So if you're aggressive with it, it starts getting aggressive back. Those types of things. So I think there's some areas in there that we need to be watching that could introduce some problems. But I think the good news in all of this is some of the more common fears that the general public has about using AI, especially in surveillance use cases. I think we can get around a lot of those problems, in facial matching and some of these things that people have been concerned about. I don't think they're as needed in some cases. I know airports still use facial matching, right? And we can argue that all day long as to, is that right or wrong? But I think in the general public areas, there's ways to get outcomes that you need without giving up the privacy in the facial matching or some of those other areas where the public's been concerned.
Yeah, like anonymization or maybe other ways. So let's use that as a transition into safety and privacy, which I think is this ongoing debate that you've had also, and you've spoken about this publicly. Why do you believe that these two goals are mutually exclusive between safety and privacy?
Or not mutually exclusive?
Yeah, aren't.
Yeah. So again, it comes down to, sometimes I'll put my hat or I'll put myself in like a physical guard, right? Shoes. And I'm like, okay, what is this physical guard able to do that does or does not offend a public person there? Well, the guard can look at you and say, I've seen you before. I don't know who you are, but I've seen you before, right? That's one thing that a guard can do. A guard can look at your behavior and go, oh, that's not authorized to be done here. When you think about what this guard is actually doing, like, we can have the AI do a very similar thing. So a guard doesn't have to have your driver's license and doesn't have to know your name to do its job. And I think, with that premise in mind, we can still have technology be able to help secure and provide life safety without having to give up, your privacy to do that. So again, this is where I keep doubling down on behavior. Is if you're looking for behavior, you're not singling people out, and you're not, caring about necessarily any of their stereotypical background. You're not.
There's some objectiveness to behavior that could lead into an issue that us or an officer would be concerned about, right? So I suspect that's probably what you're talking about.
Yeah. So that's kind of how I've looked at it. And then again, like some of the fears around this is just, I would say, naivety. I'll use naivety as a positive word instead of ignorance as a negative word.
Right.
But
we fear what we don't understand. So there's a lot of people. I mean, Tris, I have people that come up to me about AI all the time, and I'm like, that's a better conversation over a beer. So I started a happy hour, and I had 3 separate sessions of those because I'm like, yep, you want to come talk about worst case scenario? That's fine. I'm just trying to automate business workflows. So whatever, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's important that people understand this. Now, with that said, there's always, I mean, every single technology created can be used for good and can be used for bad. And I think this is where the manufacturers or the technology companies, they need to have a very strong ethical policy around how they use things and what they're really trying to achieve. And so that also has to be true. So, but yeah, with that said, I think that these enabling technologies that focus on behavior are a step in the direction to overcome a lot of that public fear. And then we've just got to make sure that we're educating people on what it is and what it isn't. So that's obviously harder to do because everyone has an agenda, it seems like nowadays. Any thought leader or any, I don't know, we could kind of go down a whole rat hole here, but people tend to have a bias themselves and how they teach people about something. So let's say that you are against something, you're always going to put a negative spin on something. If you
can spend anything you want, any way you want, for sure.
And so I think that's going to make it tough. It's going to make it really hard for people to really understand what's true and what's not on some of these technologies. But we've just got to continue to do the best we can to educate people on what it is and what it isn't. And again, just have that ethical practice within your business, that those are the things that you care about and you take seriously and you continually practice in your business.
Yeah, and this is more of a statement, and then I'll go into the next question because I want to hear more about some of the pieces you wrote. But so it's one thing that agents can not hallucinate on verifiable information like math, but it's another thing when they do hallucinate on unverifiable information, that which is subjective. And so that to me is, if it's to me, the models are built on for the post training, which is how you're using them, right? Or how we use them in practice and business practice, is understanding natural language and context when you give it to it, at a very basic stance. So, I find that it's very much the responsibility of the manufacturer in that post training to be able to handle the things of which that are not verifiable, so that way they don't hallucinate, And so I think one of the things you said earlier that I really appreciate when you explained and broke down that, hey, the camera is just trying to tell me what it sees. It transforms that into text. And then we create maybe the SOP with the customer or something you're already creating as a standard. So that they define, how do I put guardrails around the output, which would be structuring unstructured, unverifiable information, so it's less likely to hallucinate.
Yes. Yeah. And yeah, you bring up again the deterministic and non-deterministic nature of things.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I think as an industry, we need to be a little careful when we roll these things out. I think we probably lean more towards deterministic outcomes, even though the technology has more of a non-deterministic like capability. But we put those guardrails around it. And depending on what the use case is, maybe we are saying, no, this always has to have a deterministic outcome just to ensure that we're not introducing problems. And then the more capable that technology gets, we can start loosening into more of a non-deterministic application of it. So we always have those controls. And you're right. I think this is where it brings out, where does the data, who owns the data? Because to put guardrails around the data, I think this is another question we have to ask ourselves. Is there's two different pushes kind of in the industry right now with technology.
Could fall into an ethics discussion. This is good.
Yeah. And so some of these providers are like, no, we own the data. Our customer gets access to the data, and look at all the great benefits that they have through the network effect of having the data, right? Okay, great. I can understand the business reasons behind that, right? I can understand kind of even the benefits to customers behind that. On the other side, you've got, no, the customer owns the data. They can determine what they want to do with the data. Now, when you think about that, you now then put the guardrails that you're talking about around that. It's much harder to put the guardrails around data you don't own. And so I think this is where we as an industry also need to kind of think about, okay, well, how important is owning the data, and how important is the ability to be able to put those guardrails around that data? And you pointed out that it is actually extremely important to be able to do that, right? You don't know what this thing's going to do in a non-deterministic world, and nobody's going to want to roll the dice with that out of the gate, right? And just like any technology that crashes and burns out of the gate, it starts to lose credibility. Everyone's afraid of it, and maybe it doesn't grow like it should. It has the potential it should. So we want to make sure that we nurture that as we start rolling this stuff out. But yeah, putting those guardrails are extremely important around that data and to be able to determine the outcome that you want to get.
So on that note about kind of rolling out responsibly and maintaining credibility, you wrote a piece back in June 2024 in Buildings Magazine where you discuss both risk and benefits of AI-based video surveillance. How can organizations practically balance those two ideas between risk and benefits of adopting this agentic AI?
Yeah, I think, again, it starts with making sure that you understand human in the loop when they're needed, as well as that deterministic, non-deterministic nature. And again, if these are words that are new to you, non-deterministic and deterministic, like I would study them a little bit and make sure that you understand what that means. And these are just common terms in agentic AI. So that's why I'm going to kind of use those terms. But yeah, when we talk about deterministic, like that is a known outcome, and it's got enough guardrails around it, either through static programming of that workflow to the outcome based on whatever dynamic data is coming in, or you've put enough guardrails around it as it's reasoning through that it's going to only have these couple of outcomes possible, right? It's not going to hallucinate and go crazy on you. So that's what we mean by deterministic. Now, non-deterministic is it's more like us humans. It's like we could literally go anywhere through that reasoning process, and come to whatever outcome. And that's not a bad thing as long as you feel comfortable enough about how it reasons and what how does it handle the data, the unstructured variety of data coming in. How is it reasoned through that, through the various models that you have? And then is the outcome within the range of acceptability, right, that you're willing to live with, right? So that would be more of a non-deterministic type outcome. When we think about this, these capabilities, it's really important that we know when to use one versus the other when we roll this technology out. That building article was also interesting because when we think about systems in smart buildings, we're thinking about it broader than just security. It's not just security and access control in the building. You've got also HVAC systems and lighting systems and everything else. And what's really interesting about agentic AI as it applies to this is it starts to take bifurcated industries and bring them together. And that's where I believe, honestly, that cameras are going. I think most people will agree with that. It's just a matter of when. And so when we think about the transformative power of video into text, and how that affects all operations of a building, all operations of a business, everything else, you start to come to the conclusion that, yeah, this is just a really rich set of information and data about what's happening in the physical world, whether it's life safety, security, operations, supply chain, whatever it is. So these worlds are all going to start marrying together. And now you're going to have agentic flows that possibly start crossing traditional boundaries, right, that we've had as industries, right? So that will be another new exciting challenge that we get deal with down the road. But I think the premise is still the same. You have to understand what's deterministic, what's non-deterministic, and make sure that you've got the guardrails in place so that you can control that and ease into this automation and reasoning with enough control and governance that everyone's comfortable with it.
I love that. I smell somewhere there multi-agent orchestration systems. So yeah, that'll be a course of a different color, a different day. So
a whole other conversation about that.
Yeah, it's like let's just build one BA agent first, right?
Yeah.
And then we'll work on the next, dozens. So on that note, I think about the perception of the public around these kinds of systems too when we think about ethics, right? There's one side that's the responsibility of public officers to the people that build them, like you, and then we have the other side that's the public. And so what role does transparency play in helping the public feel comfortable with these types of systems that are monitoring them, potentially anytime?
Yeah, transparency to me is the root of it all. I go back to, when I was a kid and my parents would always kind of hammer this into my brain. Like if you've got nothing to hide, well, then there's nothing to be afraid of. Like, you haven't done anything wrong if you got nothing to hide. So yeah, I mean, I think the same thing applies here. Again, it goes back to what are the ethics that you have in the business? Let's say that you're the solution provider. Like, do you take seriously privacy? Do you take seriously some of these concerns that the public has and that you're designing or you're taking that into consideration when you design, right? So that's the one side. The other side we talked about was, who owns the data and why? Are you willing to have the customer own the data? Do you have to own the data? Why? And are you very transparent about that? I think we see some of those problems right now where because a customer doesn't own the data and then all of a sudden they find their data somewhere where they didn't want it, like that starts to make them upset, rightfully so. So I think that transparency is also extremely important. Who owns the data? But yeah, I mean, I always come back to the ethics. It's such a simple thing that if you as a business take this stuff seriously, then it's designed into the product itself, right? And we could argue this all the way down to just basic identity and access management policies that are used and how you secure things and how you secure the network infrastructure that you have in place. And then how do you secure the data that's there? And what are the actions that you're trying to take to make sure that that is truly protected for your customers? Those types of behaviors reflect just as much as you applying agentic AI to their data and trying to do something with it as well. You just kind of sense with the business what their ethics are, and you kind of know who you're dealing with here. Again, transparency to me is just absolutely imperative to how you're going to operate, especially in this new agentic world.
So I had a presentation where they were delivering CU credits on a recent business trip. This discussion came up because it was like, how much do we want the AI to know about, let's say, my business practice, because I don't want to give up my information or my proprietary process to this AI so it's out in the world. And I was like, fair, because you got to make money. I get it. No one's asking to give away your intellectual property. But at the same time, aren't we, and I challenged the person that says, because I was like, aren't we also in a collective where we have a responsibility to protect the public, right? I mean, isn't that why we got into this space in the first place, right? I mean, we probably could all make a lot more money going into Silicon Valley, as opposed to we're here. Not to say we don't. I'm sure you've done well, and I've done well in this industry. It's been very good to me. But I also find it concerning that there's a lot of closeness that happens because it's my information, and I'm thinking like, hey, like to some extent, but imagine if the forces combined and they were able to create this one thing that could detect. The problem is they can't differentiate, maybe because if they're all working from the same data pool. But I do wonder though, as they use things like these large vision models and they use their layer of architecture to use Anthropic or something else that transforms video into text, their flavor of it, like we said earlier, and they could get different results from their agent. But I think at some point there's probably some bridge to cross where it's like, hey, we're all in this together. And so I think customers would, if I was someone that says, I care about transparency, I think I do, meaning I'm okay giving my data out if it means that's good for the community that I serve as well as myself, right? And some people, they don't want that. They're like, hey, Big Brother's following me. And I'm thinking, like, there's a good chance Big Brother already knows you. If you've got
Yep.
Facebook, like it's already done. Like Meta's already learned off of you. Just forget
Yep.
about it. Okay, it's over, right? I think really maybe the orb comes next. If you've seen those where they'll identify in different ways until they get your blood type or your DNA.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. You bring up a really good point, and I agree with you. Are we so money hungry and are we so capitalistic that we can't think about the greater good of what we're trying to accomplish? And I am very happy that there are still companies out there that understand what I would consider an open architecture. It is okay to share data both directions, especially for the mutual benefit of our customer. It's for the mutual benefit of life safety and security. You should be putting more importance on your relationship and your business ethics with the customer than you should about any proprietary data that you own that you think creates your differentiation. I'm not saying that intellectual property isn't important. It is important. But I think we put so much importance on this new gold of data that we hoard it so much that actually causes a degradation in reputation. It causes a degradation in ecosystem sharing that we miss out on a much greater opportunity than otherwise we would have had. So yeah, that's why we continually talk about open architectures and making sure that we're having a win-win mutual benefit relationship with all of the partners in our ecosystem that helps not just us and not just them, but also the customer in the end. And being in physical security, we are all trying to make the world safer and more secure. And so we should also be thinking about that. And we can still win doing that. But you just got to put more importance on your relationship with your customers and your partners than you do on any differentiator of actual data.
and maybe with A2A protocol, that your agent will talk to someone else's agent, and their agent will talk to someone else's agent. So for the audience, A2A protocols, a communication protocol that Google made, so that agents could talk to other agents. So
Yep.
meaning that the openness from these agents, I would suspect, will be inevitable in order to protect what we do and protect our customers, our business, and our communities. So
Yep.
let's talk a little bit more about suspicious behavior, because that came up a few times, right? So you advocated for AI identifying that suspicious behavior rather than using persistent tracking or facial recognition. Can you explain how that works in practice? Maybe give us a little bit more detail around that.
Yeah, so I kind of gave a little bit of an example in the beginning when we were talking about, laying down.
Hmm.
But what we're really focused on here is looking at behavior and looking at behavior in context. So when you put that into practice, you're simply just trying to look at the scene and trying to look at behaviors. And it's really no difference than, let's say Splunk did with just data, looking for normal behaviors and abnormal behaviors. And you could also kind of go back to traditional computer vision model methodologies and say, okay, well, I'm looking for this specific behavior. But what's really unique about the agentic AI is, again, unstructured data coming in. There could be a whole number of things that it's seeing, and now it has to reason through that. And so examples of this would be, if I'm in a retail parking lot and I get out of my car, most people will get out of the car and walk directly into the building. But if you see somebody who gets out of the car and starts serpentining through all the different cars, that's not a normal behavior, right? And it starts to create that level of suspicion. And so that's what you're keying off of. That's leading indications that somebody is trying to case cars, right? Smash and grab or steal catalytic converters. So again, when we're talking about behaviors, we're trying to say what is normal and what's not normal in context for the area that I'm at. And that's what you key in on. And again, that's unlocked with this enabling technology of agentic AI more than what we've ever seen with computer vision models that have been created. I think we can also look at it from a life safety perspective. We've talked to several customers about PPE. And we've had PPE models for a while, right? Are you wearing your hard hat? Are you wearing your vest? That's like a common thing. But in practice, that's not really what they're concerned about. What they're concerned about is, are they wearing the right, hard hat and PPE, whatever? But they're also saying they shouldn't be wearing this either, right? And that could be a number of things. It could be like sandals, barefoot. It could be shorts. It could be, whatever. So it's what are they wearing and what they should not be wearing. And it's such a dynamic thing that changes from company to company to company that it's hard to make a model that's really good at all of that. So if I can look more at behavior and understanding context of what the camera is seeing and then reason through that, it's a lot more agile to those different use cases, right? So that's what I mean by behavior, and where agentic fits better than what our traditional computer vision models have been able to do today.
I love that. Yeah. So it seems like behavior presents a lot of edge cases that we can't build for that agents can account for. And so that really gets us to the next level of what we're trying to do. So but I do wonder, like, where does the line get drawn, right? Like, where do you see at the ethical line between proactive safety, an example, the serpentine person, versus what's invasive surveillance?
Well, again, transparency is part of this.
Yeah.
What is the technology and what is it not? But this is where I come back to the lifeguard is you're not a criminal until you've done a crime, right? So we're not trying, we like to take the approach that you're innocent until proven guilty, right? So just because you came on a property doesn't mean that you're now a suspect and everything else. What we're trying to say is that there are behaviors that are not tolerated here, and we have trained our AI to look for those behaviors. And when we see those behaviors or things that could lead up to those behaviors, we like to send a friendly reminder through a customized generative AI talk down that tells you, hey, don't do that. Right? It's kind of like your last chance to make the right decision. And so that's really what we're focused on from a proactive nature and a preventative nature. And we've been doing this now for, I think we're 7 years into the technology doing this. What we have found in all the data is about 70% of the time when that automated talk down, and back then, this was just a pre-recorded message, right? So it's not the new capabilities of this dynamic talk down we have today. But we learned that 70% of the time, most people would just go away. That's a phenomenal number, right?
So you said making it believable is like making them just believe someone's there so they would go away. But if it was like an automated thing, they're like, probably nobody's watching it.
Right. So it had to be believable. But when it was believable, 70% of the time they went away. Now, that means that 30% of the time they're still engaged in what they were going to do. So now an alert gets sent up to a human. They're in like an alert response center. They then get into the unit live. They talk through the microphone and they actually start calling out, hey, you in the blue shirt over there by the garbage cans, that's not allowed here, whatever they're doing, right? Please leave. If you don't, we're going to call authorities, right? And it's a lot more personable of a message. We noticed that like an additional 20% of the people would leave then. So now we've got 90% of the time, if it was truly believable and they knew that they were identified and there was this last chance to make a decision to not do what they were going to do, then 90% of the time they leave. That's a phenomenal number if it's believable. We're not striving for 100% necessarily. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. We would always strive for as much as possible, but in reality, are we ever going to hit 100%? Probably not. And the reason why is because you've got professionals who are organized crime. They're going to do it, right? That's how they get paid. You've got people who are so desperate that they're going to do it. Or you've got somebody who's not lucid, right? Mentally ill, drugs or something, and they're just not thinking it through and they're going to do it. So those are those cases I was talking about before where you got to have a human involved to deal with the professionals, with the not lucid people or the desperate people to see if you can deal with it or respond to it before it gets out of control. But again, that's 10% of the times where you do need the human, and 90% of the time we can automate this stuff, right? So that's what's exciting about the agentic and how we see the proactive preventative nature of this really becoming a stronger side. I mean, technology has always been good at investigations, like the reactive after the fact, but it's been really hard to try to prevent. And so that's where I believe we can match technologically the capabilities of response with prevention and actually make all those jobs to be done, I was saying before, actually be real. And that's what will make the effect. We'll get the economies of scale for humans. We'll actually decrease crime as population grows. We'll be able to get more efficient in investigations and even prosecutions. Here's another concept that I think is really important for people to understand is the believable nature of deterrence. People believe that they will never get prosecuted. There's no way you're going to deter that, right?
They're like, they don't care if they're getting watched or not. They're like, you're not going to do anything. Just like what maybe would happen, was it in New York or in San Francisco, people were stealing because you could steal up to like $700, $800 and they wouldn't, adjudicate you or anything. Yeah, it's wild.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's a symbiotic relationship between holding people accountable and deterring people. So you can't just focus 100% on prevention without prosecution because it will then not be believable. And you can't just rely 100% on accountability because you're missing out on an opportunity to prevent. So this is where we believe that there's the balance in those jobs to be done, where prevention is real and prosecution, affordable prosecution is real. Technologies, agentic technologies can help in both that actually make it, we call it spiraling upwards. As you get better at one, it helps the other and the other helps the other, and it starts to actually become more and more efficient over time. So
I love that it's a continued case that you're making with when we go back to the line of, invasive or not invasive or what's helpful. And it's like we want to help as much as possible because we don't know in the end if justice will be served. And so at minimum, what we can do is put up a 90% chance that we will deter the situation. That doesn't ever have to go into, maybe they still get adjudicated, but that pushes off that. So now only the 10% is a responsibility of the justice system to handle, and hopefully they handle it responsibly. So let's start to wrap up, right? I want to talk about the future. And you said ethical AI is an emerging focus for your work, but what new frameworks or standards do you believe will define responsible AI use in the physical security industry over the next few years?
Yeah, we kind of touched on it. The enabling technologies that unlock this really are these VLMs, LLMs, right? So the vision language models or video language models working in conjunction with large language models for reasoning. That unlocks it all. And this is what's interesting about the industry is the big players, your Anthropics, your OpenAIs, these companies have all kind of established and I would say won the battle, right, for agentic, at least the tool set for agentic capabilities. Now it's the responsibilities of other companies to actually make something valuable out of that, right? And so again, that's the unlock. When we think about physical security, we are moving away from humans watching monitors on video management systems, right? Actually having computers and these agents looking for suspicious behavior, assessing decision making and actioning on that from prevention, and then providing that data for very quick reporting, investigations, and those types of things. We've already kind of covered that here. But I also believe that these enabling technologies will change the way that we do things. In other words, agentic systems are awesome for asking a question and having it tell you what's happening, right? And as a security professional, I shouldn't have to go to my business intelligence report system to see something. I shouldn't have to go to a video management system and look through archive footage to see something. I shouldn't have to rely on, let's say, my guard services or alert response company to give me a report on what's happening. Like, that's all kind of part of the agentic AI experience. I should be able, through a natural language interface, ask the question, what are my number one threats right now happening in my enterprise, right? And it will tell you. And you say, can you show me video evidence of that, right? And it will actually show you. So that's where we're moving. And I think as security professionals, we need to get into being better at prompting and asking questions and having the system provide us those answers instead of us feeling like we're the ones who have to find the needle in the haystack all the time, right? I mean, when effectively executed, we become knowledge workers again. We ask the right questions. When we get the answer, we're also able to work through conclusions as to what we should do about it, which is what we're hired to do, right? And so I believe that the future is unlocked now by these capabilities. And this is not something that traditional computer vision can do. You can't just have an anomaly happen and send an alert. That to me is table stakes basic 101. The agentic experience really truly transforms how we do our work. And therefore we need to adjust to that.
Love it. So take us home, Steve, on this last question. And I would break it up in two parts. One, your just fund perspective, and then the other one in concerning the average citizen, right? And the average citizen is all of us, right? How, not necessarily that we're a manufacturer or podcast host or whatever, right? And so imagine 5 years from now. So what does success look like for agentic AI in 2030? And think about it from the perspective of public deployment, from the perception of the citizen, and maybe Steve's fun outlook.
Yeah. So I think the just like all technologies in life safety and security, we've become accustomed to cameras being everywhere, right? I think we're all kind of used to that. What's kind of started the latest stir was, well, what are those cameras able to do, right, from a privacy perspective, right? So we'll work through that. But as we think about what's possible in robotics, there's a lot of work being done on humanoid robotics. There's a lot of work done on drones and other things. I think they will become a part of our standard life, again, driven by agentic capabilities itself. We are focused more on looking for behaviors that are suspicious, that are causing us concern, and we want to remind people beforehand. So we will get used to that. And then, when we think about, just the way that we do our work, again, we focus more on agentic or more on thought leaders and not thought leaders, but thought work, where we prompt and where we try to think through these things. That's just kind of what the world looks like. And when it is that way, I think crime, unfortunately, I have a feeling will always be around. There's always going to be those opportunistic people that do that. But we'll be able to be more effective and efficient with the resources that we have, because again, it's a loss. It's an expense to any enterprise to have to deal with life safety and security. And I don't want that to sound like a negative, but it is. I mean, you only throw as many dollars as you need to into it. So we'll be just more efficient and effective with how we do that. But what's exciting about that is what we're talking about with the bridging or the crossover now into different business sectors, right? Where your cameras now are actually data feeds for marketing and data feeds for operations, right? And HR. And so that cost can be spread across the organization now. It might cause some interesting decision-making changes on who actually is deciding what technologies to put in place. Is it going to be the physical security directors or vice presidents, or is it going to roll all the way up to the CIO and the CTO? And I know we've been talking about this for like 10 or 20 years when we IP enabled the cameras, right? The difference here is IP enabling a camera isn't interesting to a CIO, but information that's actionable for the business, whether it's life safety, security, operations, HR, marketing, whatever, that is interesting to a CIO, right? That's why I believe this is what's going to unlock where CIOs will become more and more interested in what cameras and what AI systems and what infrastructure exists throughout their enterprise, because it becomes a source of data, just like all of the digital information that they're getting already, right? So that's kind of Steve going into hey, this is where the world's really going to go. But I think that changes how manufacturers of these technologies think about who their buyer is. It changes how system integrators, because here's something about system integrators you got to think about. When you start deploying true agentic systems, they become more and more vertically integrated by the day, right? Which means that the integration, and you mentioned A to A, and I would add like MCP and some of these other standards that are agentic flow, like that's going to start minimizing the value that a system integrator adds into integrating systems, because the providers are either going to already account for it and make it easy enough that anyone could just do it, or they're just going to be vertically integrated to begin with, right? So system integrators are going to change. And then when we think about just the public and how they perceive these things, it'll just continue to look like a camera there. And it'll become, depending on what they're concerned about, again, we'll just be constantly dealing with, well, what is that camera doing? Is it recording me? Is it going to take my privacy? I think that debate will continually happen over time. But yeah, there'll just be more and more capabilities that these systems are doing. It'll look very similar to the debate that we had with cookies on web browsers, by the way. Right? With all this information that these cameras are going to get, we're going to just rehash that battle again. Who knows about me and all that other stuff? Like, that's going to be an interesting thing. But we've already learned a little bit about that from the browser world. I think we've just got to now figure out, okay, how does that look now when the physical world literally gets transformed into data too?
Have you heard from, sounds like a really exciting future. Have you heard from or about, I think Elon's, or someone presented this idea to Elon Musk about using Teslas as a way to create like a super cluster using the onboard GPUs or all the AI computers that are basically built into the Teslas. I do wonder in the future if cameras will become of that same network.
Yeah, no, I agree. In fact, I mean, you look at all the chipsets that are going in. Axis Communications has their own, chipset that goes in there, and then of course a lot of other manufacturers will use. I forgot the name of its chipset, but anyway, yeah, they become even more and more power efficient and more power capable. This is the world that we live in LVT, because we have a lot of solar powered edge devices, and so yeah, there's a power footprint that you got to be really conscientious of there. Yeah, you're right. We will start seeing more of a mesh of those edge compute. But I also think the other interesting thing is data centers that are now in space instead of terrestrial. It makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I think we're going to start putting compute in the weirdest places that we've ever thought of. And it's going to be edge and cloud and like all of it working together, which goes back to, we never discussed this, but cybersecurity of your edge devices. I mean, let's hammer this home again. Like, it is embarrassing as a producer in this market that has other competitors who do not take cybersecurity seriously, especially with a camera connected to a cell modem. I mean, talk about the most vulnerable thing for attack, right? And now you want to put edge compute right in a mesh to do that kind of compute too. Like, cybersecurity couldn't be even more important than it ever has before. Combining edge compute, AI, video cameras, and mobility of connectivity, like that is the perfect recipe for disaster if we don't get our arms around this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Well, Steve, this has been great. I really enjoyed this conversation. You're a super smart guy. And I hope the audience enjoyed this. I know that they, as much as I have, I know that they have. We'll probably have to have a sidebar of nerdy talk, over a coffee some other day that doesn't necessarily have to do with the ethics side. But I've learned a lot. I mean, taking the deep dive around ethics with agents is going to be continued conversation for time to come. And I would love to continue to pick your brain as that topic grows.
Yeah, same here. Love the discussion, Don. Excited for future ones.
Thank you.